morning. Thanks everybody for coming here. Welcome to the Biology Department. And just on behalf of two groups co-sponsoring tonight's talk, the Environmental Concerns Committee. So our faculty, I'm Damon Mole, and the chairperson of our committee, Ronald Witthuizen. To sponsor a whole series of events leading up to Earth Day. And so kind of the theme really is one of change. We've already had earlier this week a presentation by a couple of the campus architects working on some of the building. And we're really glad to have Dr. Steve Jay here this evening. Just a little flash forward. Next week we'll have a couple of campus tours, kind of look at what's going on in terms of the grounds, the sustainable practices that are going on campus. A chance for you, for everybody in the community to be able to reflect on questions. So there'll be a reflection board that's set up this Wednesday and Thursday of next week. And then Earth Day on Friday, the students for sustainability have organized an activity down at the community garden in the afternoon next week. And then one of the things we'll try and do is just keep environmental, sustainable kind of things out in front of you. This is also co-sponsored by Global Health Initiative here at the college, and really my contact with Dr. Jay is he, among a lot of other things, serves on the advisory committee for the Global Health Initiative. And so it was through that contact and through kind of a serendipitous meeting a couple of years ago at IU that got to begin to know him, and it is just a real pleasure to have him here. So Dr. Jay's a professor of medicine and public health. He's the past founding chair of the Richard Fairbanks School of Public Health in Indianapolis, where even though he's, I guess, technically retired and off salary, they're getting a really good deal because he's still heavily involved in a lot of research, teaching, service in the community, as well as patient care. He's got really broad interests. And Steve attended Wabash College, went from here back in the early mid-60s to IU School of Medicine, and then completed his graduate medical education in medicine and pulmonary medicine at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical School in Dallas. He's been on the faculty at IU Med School since 1976, served as Dean for Continuing Medical Education there and chair of the Fairbanks School of Public Health. He told me to keep this short. He's been really heavily involved in huge efforts both at the state as well as national level in terms of tobacco control, tobacco smoking control, tobacco cessation programs. Is just a wealth of knowledge on all of that. But as a pulmonologist, his foray into what is the huge problem and issue of climate change, and as that intersects with health, really in some ways most recently came to the fore a couple of years ago, where he was instrumental in helping to lead the effort to get a coal-fired power plant in Indianapolis shut down, testifying and providing evidence that was drive the data-driven argument for the impact on the health of people in the community. And so, see, he comes with a really wide background, and so it's a real pleasure for me to introduce Dr. Steve Jay. He's going to talk on climate change, challenges, science, public policy, and reverence for life. Let's welcome him.
Thank you very much, Eric, for that generous introduction. I feel a little bit older after listening to all that. So. I'm looking out at Dr. Brooks, who, as a student, we used to hang around these niches in various campuses, Alley Woods and others. And I mention that because ecology, I wanted to be an ecologist at one time. And it turns out I became an ecologist. I'm just an ecologist of public health. It turns out the interconnectedness of things applies out at Allie Woods. It also applies in human health-related areas. So I've been able to draw on those experiences at Allie Woods. Reverence for Life is there with a purpose, a couple of purposes. One is I learned all about a famous role model who, for me at least, Albert Schweitzer. I was just fascinated. I developed that interest when I was at Wabash. How can a person be so brilliant as a musician and a theologian and devote his life to the care of the less fortunate people? And his philosophy of life was reverence for life and all living things. And we have to reflect a bit about that as we think about what lies before us is one of the grand challenges of the history of humanity. I hope you'll understand and a little bit more at by the end of this discussion. So I'm pushing the button that Eric told me to push, and I'll click.
Maybe try this.
Oh, now look at that. See? You did it.
I push a different button now.
Nous sommes tous menacés.
That because of our activities,
La planète sera chaude. Les espèces disparaissent. 海面上升。Hombres y mujeres son expulsados de sus casas.
Parce qu'ils n'ont plus de nourriture.
d'eau potable.
والأراضي الصالحة للزراعة.
No entanto, há soluções concretas.
Jobs. Share.
Beter verdelen. More sharing.
एक रौनक मुस्तकबिल के लिए उम्मीद भी है।
À Paris, en 2015. À Paris, en 2015, les gouvernants du monde entier
Memenusi netanyahu.
والعمل معا untuk menjadikan Paris 2015
Борьбе с глобальным климатическим изменением. Nous comptons sur vous.
Мы рассчитываем на вас. Contamos contigo.
إننا نعول عليه.
我们对您寄予厚望。
Contiamo su di te. Anche prima del tempo.
Nous comptons sur vous.
We're counting on you.
This video clip was prepared in the roll-up to Paris 2015. Our family was in France about that time, and they were gearing up in Paris for the United Nations Summit on Climate Change, the first such summit of its kind in world history, and perhaps will go down in history as one of the most important events. So 196 nations signed this historic agreement to take collective action to decrease carbon footprints globally. And I created this presentation for Earth Hour for the School of Public Health, and which Earth Hour is kind of a fitting symbol of humankind's quest to preserve a habitable planet. Dr. Margaret Chan, Director of the World Health Organization, puts our challenge this way. For public health, climate change is the defining issue for the 21st century. So my focus this evening will be on the public health implications of climate change, primarily. Evidence of global warming and climate change is all around us. My wife and I were just in the Everglades, riding a bicycle across the Everglades. You can do that, and it's a marvelous experience. And we saw firsthand the impacts of climate change. We saw levels of water going across trails that had previously been dry forever to the guides, and we're now riding through water. And we're seeing the evidence of the tremendous intrusion of salt water into the ecosystems in South Florida. President Obama in 2015 spoke from the Everglades to raise awareness about this issue. But let's talk about America. Let's talk about Americans who today and over the last number of years have been suffering from the impacts of climate change. So about 4,000 miles up to the Chukchi Sea, Kivalina. This is an image that shows what remains of their island, which is being engulfed by the Chukchi Ocean. 6,000 miles from Kivalina, Alaska, in the Middle East, severe sustained drought from 2006 to 2011 created one of the major catastrophes in that part of the world, the Fertile Crescent, which resulted in part for the mass migration of peoples now flooding into Europe. The impact of global warming climate change on this, it's multifactorial. There are several reasons why these people are on the move. But climate change has been called the threat multiplier. Everything else being equal, climate change is now contributing to destabilization of groups of people. And that spells a problem for all of us. We have world leaders stepping up in amazing way. Pope Francis, for example, urging world leaders to heal the open wounds of a planet torn by hatred, greed, poverty, and pollution. If you haven't read that encyclical, it's a marvelous piece of work. He obviously consulted with the best and brightest climate scientists in the world and ethicists, and it's quite a remarkable work. But some voices from the United States, some reasonable voices. This one I pick from Jay Inslee, who said, "We're the first generations to feel the sting of global warming, climate change. We're the last that can do something about it." That gets the attention of students when I present this at the university. It is the case that we're the first generation to really fully understand the implications of what's happening. And we are, according to the best and brightest of 70,000 climate scientists worldwide, we are the last generation that can do something about it. So I would hope at the end of this, however minutes we have, that I stimulate your thinking, your reflection on the issue, and hopefully move you to answer some unanswered questions. I usually start with Google, or you can email me if you want. And I would hope that you move from some knowledge here to action, particularly the young students. My generation has not handed you a fair hand, I guess, to put it mildly. We have dropped the ball in many ways. And so we need new thinking, clever ideas, and bright students coming up with answers to questions that we've been unable to address. Now, young people in this country, data shows us that you guys, you young people, you get it. And polls from the Yale Climate Initiative and Pew Charitable Trust and others show that today 65% of Americans understand that climate change is happening. They understand that humans are in part driving this, a significant part, and they understand that there are things that can be done and need to be done to get us where we need to be. Now I show you these young skiers. These are Olympic champions and others who penned an open letter to President Obama and Congress in 2013 pleading for them to take action on climate change. Why do you suppose these skiers are interested in climate change? Did y'all watch the Sochi Olympics? The famous picture of the fella, does that hand mean You did watch the Olympics? No, I was just saying it gets too hot. They can't see. Oh, I'm sorry. You probably saw that iconic figure of a fellow sitting there with no shirt on, and he had a laptop, and the skiers are just right out in front. It looks like just skiing down the fake snow that they had on the slopes. The number of cities in the world now that can host a Winter Olympics, 15 years ago, that number was this big. It was a large number. That number today is like this. There are only a handful of cities worldwide that are going to be eligible to apply and host the Olympics because of lack of snow and ice. These Olympic skiers are pleading for something because they have to practice, and they're having to go farther and farther north and higher mountain ranges to find places to practice. Now here's the bottom line of Paris. The voices of Paris 21st Conference of the Parties, COP. We see that the challenge shown on this graph is color-coded. Blue is awful. That's no action. If we just business as usual and just keep kind of on our current path, the blue curve takes us to 4.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial, in terms of pre-industrial revolution temperatures for planet Earth. I won't go into details about the harm done to public health and the environment, but it's fairly staggering. We want to be on the green pathway down below that takes us to 2 degrees centigrade, 2 degrees Celsius. But the problem is, as Dr. Wetzel and I were talking about earlier, is even that is problematic. But that's the current aim for the researchers, to try to put some kind of a stake in the ground and urge us all to do what's necessary to move us from a curve that is currently the red curve to the green pathway. Nous comptons sur vous. We're counting on you. En français, oui? I was a French minor. You wouldn't know it, right? So I'm going to chat a little bit about what did we know, when did we know it, which I think is compelling information that usually surprises people. Who's burning what? I mean, we're burning fossil fuels, we're putting CO2 in the air, right? The health impacts, and maybe something to lead us out of the swamp. By the way, my wife and I took a fabulous hike in the swamp. One of the fellows that was on it, there were 20 of us, right as we were about to, we had walking sticks and we had special shoes on and just pants that we didn't mind walking into a swamp with. And the fellow said, "Now why are we doing this?" And it was a delightful 2 hours. I would highly recommend it. There are gators all along the road, and we saw some snakes and all that sort of thing. But it was just, it was marvelous to witness. So that's what we're about here. Now, sometimes it's helpful to step back from issues to gain a clearer perspective. This thin blue line of Earth's atmosphere, just 60 miles thick, is what keeps Earth habitable, protected from dangerous radiation from space. And it was brought to my attention a number of years ago by one of my former interns, Dave Wolf, astronaut Dave Wolf, who thought in his mind it captured, like nothing else, the fragility of the Earth and its atmosphere. And so I've thought a lot about that since then. Now, I'm a pulmonologist and have been involved in caring for patients with respiratory disease, and I came up with this imperfect sort of analogy here. But let's consider a living, breathing human on the left side who happens to be smoking. We know that causes lung disease and may cause respiratory failure. And burning fossil fuel on the right panel causes climate change, if you will, earth failure. Interestingly enough, the human body responds to respiratory failure by increasing the carbon dioxide tensions in your bloodstream. You don't get rid of CO2 the way you should. Oxygen tensions decrease, but interestingly, Earth CO2 goes up and O2 goes down. We're being told by planet Earth that we've got a problem. We need to do something about it. Now, in pulmonary medicine, armed with these kinds of data, we would go in, we would try to make a diagnosis. We would first do no harm. First of all, we try to prevent the problem to begin with. But we would, having diagnosed the problem, we would introduce treatment and get on with it to try to help the patient. And the question is, why are we dithering? I love that word, dithering. Why are we dithering here? So we'll explore a bit of that. One reason is we've been slow to accept the facts of science and common sense. And in some ways, our global tobacco and climate change problems are similar. They actually have amazing connections. So contrast the rapid adoption of Laennec's stethoscope. There's a picture of the great Frenchman Laennec. I have to show this as a pulmonologist. He's sort of the father of pulmonary medicine, actually the father of clinical science as we know it today, because he invented a stethoscope that was used systematically to examine the chest, which made physical examination popular, which made clinical research possible, and so on and so on. But look at that curve. Nobody was against the stethoscope. It actually went viral. You can prove that to yourself by going to cultureomics.org and plugging in stethoscope, and you can see for yourself out of 12% of all books published in human history, Google Books, right, on cultureomics.org, you can prove to yourself that it went viral. Curve A. Curve B, not so much. Slow adoption and diffusion of tobacco and climate change policies, very slow, in part because unlike the stethoscope where nobody was really against it, we have folks who are very much against cleaning up the environment. The good news is that's beginning to change. Well, we've known of the links between air pollution and human disease since Hippocrates and the Industrial Revolution. In 1948, 20 people died and 7,000 were sickened from air pollution in Donora, Pennsylvania, in the United States, 1948. That's seen, by the way, in the clock. That's noon, and that picture was taken at noon on that day. So we've had terrible problems with industrial air pollution and human sickness that goes way back. The global effects were described actually in terms of connecting the dots between air pollution and global warming. Fourier in 1827 described the greenhouse effect, 1827. Arrhenius in 1896 talked about human-induced CO2 and climate change. So the burning of fossil fuels the greenhouse effect has been known for a long time. The sun comes in, radiation strikes the earth, some of it reflects back into space, other is trapped. And then greenhouse gases, it's like putting a shawl on or a polar plus. We're creating sort of a shield, and greenhouse gases increase the temperature. One of the most remarkable scientific papers is this one by Guy Callender in 1938, where he specifically researched man's production of carbon dioxide through industrial means, burning coal and fossil fuels. on the temperature of the Earth. And using over 140 monitoring stations around the planet Earth, this is 1938, he ends up having his medical illustrator, or actually he probably did this on a computer, right? No. This is hand-drawn original stuff. Here he describes the overage of CO2 added to the atmosphere over the past 50 years, the excess, and related that to the slope of the curve of temperature on planet Earth. This is in 1938, published in a prestigious journal. By 1958, 20 years later, the climate scientists were well aware of the issue. And a famous fellow by the name of Charles Keeling, as a grad student, was looking for something to do, and he decided that he wanted to go to Hawaii and do his research. Why not? Somebody's got to do that, right? So as a young grad student, he goes to Hawaii, Mauna Loa, and he creates one of the most famous curves in science, which is the Keeling curve. And those are CO2 concentrations on the vertical, and years from 1958 to 2015. And you can see that there's a steady increase in carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere. The CO2, on average, in the atmosphere at the end of this talk will be higher than it was at the beginning of this talk. And this has been going on for a long, long period of time. Beautifully demonstrated by Keeling. Now, when did officials in the United States become familiar with this evidence and the research? In 1965, Lyndon Baines Johnson, President of the United States, was informed by committees of scientists that had been reviewing the literature that we had a problem. And it was brought to his attention, and he publicly reviewed the problem and said this generation has altered the atmosphere on a global scale through a steady increase in CO2 from burning of fossil fuels. Around this time, 1969, one of the world's most famous climate scientist, researcher, Roger Revelle, who's seen here shaking hands with LBJ, had a young student at Harvard by the name of Al Gore in his class. Al Gore was interested in this issue, and we probably know the rest of the story. He was right on target then, he's right on target now, but he was probably the wrong messenger to carry the information. Not due to necessarily any fault of his own, just the fact that he happened to be a prominent politician and these issues become politicized. Al Gore did hold the first congressional hearings on climate change in 1976. By 1978, the National Academy of Sciences came out, and the chairman of a committee reviewing this issue said, we've got a problem, we need to solve it now. That's 1978. Carl Sagan, the famous Carl Sagan on Cosmos, are we willing to tolerate ignorance and complacency in matters that affect the entire human family? This is in 1980, famous astrophysicist. So at this time, nations around the country began to say, what are we doing about this? And they turned to the United Nations for help and suggested that a committee be formed, and that committee, which was an amalgamation of a couple of extant committees, became the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which in 1988 began to harvest research from all over the world, systematically review it, and publish this research. They did not do original research on their own part, they simply harvested research from all the leading climate scientists in the world. Their aim, report quality research on human-induced climate change. 5 reports have been issued from that body, and in reading the reports and reading what the climate scientists in the 50s and early 60s were saying, I can tell you that the guys in the 50s and 60s had it nailed at that time. There's very little added except mountains of scientific data, just adding on. It's kind of a pile on. Actually, I had a slide at one time. There's a Wabash game, and it was Wabash football players. They're piling on. I use that, just to, this is piling on, right? So all of this led then to Paris of 2015, late November, early December. The science of climate change is compelling. It is really, really compelling. Now, let's just take a look. Here we have, for 650,000 years, CO2 was never above 300 parts per million, the left panel, and this is time from way back to 2000. And you can see the vertical images there that include carbon dioxide, CO2, methane, and nitrous oxide, three of the important greenhouse gases. On the right panel, you see since 1958 the CO2 going up at an increasing rate. And today it's more than 400 parts per million. Specifically 319.16, just March 9th, a few weeks ago, record annual increase in CO2 occurred, 3.05 parts per million, the largest increase in the 56 years of the Keeling curve data. So things are occurring in a logarithmic or an exponential way here. I want to make sure we understand that. February 16, 2016, the average global CO2 was 402 parts per million. Prior to 1800, it was 280. Well, who is burning what? We know that the top emitters of carbon dioxide, China, United States, European Union, and India. The good news is United States and European Union have begun to stabilize the CO2 output. We still put massive amount of CO2 into the air compared to other countries in the world. China is about 5.9% growth rate. India is even more than that. The only good news there is both of those countries are getting extremely serious about dealing with this issue. And so we'll hear more about that later. What are the sources of the emissions? And this just shows you in a cartoon fashion that we have various sectors shown here, with about a third coming from the electricity sector, about a third from transportation, industry about a fifth. Agriculture is a significant contributor to greenhouse gases, and commercial as well. So what's been the impact of greenhouse gas emissions on global temperature? You have to pause during these discussions to think a little bit about the Boundary Waters Canoe Area. Anybody been up there? You have to think positive thoughts about things, and just so put yourself there, right? That's where my wife and I'll be before too long here. We have a little cabin up there, which is great. So let's take a look at what the production of CO2, burning of fossil fuels, is doing. And shown on the left is temperature and CO2. The line, black line, is CO2 concentration from 1880 to 2000. And this is superimposed on the temperature, global temperatures at this point. And you can see significant relationship. The figures on the right, you can easily go to Google and pull these up at any time. This is just July 2015. July of 2015 was the hottest month in the history of the planet. And it's typical to find red all over the planet in places where it shouldn't be red. Like Greenland. Greenland, you've got a lot of ice, potential water sitting on these landmass areas. And what happens to ice on the land masses when it melts? It goes where? You guys are Wabash students, yeah. It goes into the ocean, right? Yeah. And with temperature increasing, you get expansion of water, you get rising sea levels. And the red in Greenland just shows you that shouldn't be red. It's just very warm in Greenland. But look at the curve on the right. This is the melt of Greenland ice cap. The line down, and then it gets to 2012 and it plummets. And I can't even think of what 570 gigatons per year means. That's a number that I have a hard time considering. The Arctic ice melt. It was predicted that the polar caps would be melted pretty much by the 2100 out there where the red line is. Notice the blue line. This means the scientists got it wrong. They underestimated the rapidity of the melting of these ice caps. It's occurring at a very alarming rate. And just to show you a couple of images, I love this one, The Snows of Kilimanjaro. Do you guys still have to read that book here? Maybe that's high school now, I don't know. But when Hemingway wrote that in 1938, you had snow and ice on Kilimanjaro, and now you don't have, you've got to be in a helicopter above the volcano and look down and you'll see ice. That's all that remains. Why is it such a big deal that there's very little snow and ice up on the top of Kilimanjaro? Can you guys think of a reason? Good point. Who lives down at the base of that mountain? People, right? And other creatures. And they depend on water. That's right. So they are so strapped right now, they're actually trying to grow trees and use forests to blunt the impact of climate change and try to slow the melting of the ice in Kilimanjaro. Let's come closer to home, Virginia Key, Florida. The ocean rise is predicted to be about 3 feet up. 3 feet up will eliminate most of South Florida. So where my wife and I were bicycling is gone. That will be gone. One of the great ecosystems in the world, subtropical areas, will be water. Already the freshwater aquifers in Florida are being filled with salt water. The coming together and the formation of brackish water, the salt and the fresh water, the ratio of those two things, and I'm speaking from stupidity here. These students know far more than I know about this. But it turns out that living creatures live within a tight range of the ratios of salt and fresh water. And so many species produce their young and send them out into the Gulf and beyond. It's a very fragile ecosystem where the land and the water come together. Bob Petty gave a brilliant essay at Wabash years ago about that interface. And that's under threat right now. But look at the rise here. We have an increasing rate of rise. And you guys have seen pictures of Miami. And Miami is at the epicenter and is sort of the largest, is the site with the largest financial stake in sea level rise. And there's billions upon billions of dollars. There are about $500 billion. And all it will take is a Katrina or similar sort of thing, and you'll have major problems in the Miami area. They had an interview with the mayor of South Miami a few months ago, I saw, who was standing on a sidewalk, sun's out, the cars are driving through water, and the picture was on him, his face, and then they panned back and you could see his feet, and he had water running across his feet. And he was making the point about sea level rise. Recent data that's just been published showing the magnitude of this. If you look at coastal United States, all of the areas that are colored there are threatened. Actually, they're right now having problems with rising sea levels in various forms. Florida, particularly South Florida, Louisiana, and California. And shown on the right are just projections of the curves up to 2100. But things are already happening at the present time. Another thing that's happening of great concern is the permafrost is beginning to melt. Permafrost will put methane into the air. Methane is occupies a sort of a small fraction of the total greenhouse gases, but it turns out it's about 60 to 70 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than is CO2. And so as you drop off these giant chunks of permafrost, you have the melting going on as we speak, and release of methane. Now, climate change and public health, one of our problems is that the countries that are producing all of the fossil fuels and putting CO2 into the air are not the countries right now suffering the most public health consequences. It's the countries in the world that are putting the least amount of CO2 in the air that are suffering the most. So we have a major issue with climate change inequities. And shown here are just the deaths portrayed in places like Africa on the top panel, and the greenhouse gas emissions coming from the United States, Russia, and so on. Now, these data are underestimates, but it gives you a feel for the magnitude of the premature disease deaths that are occurring around the world. These from POTS from Nature, 2005. Millions of cases of illness directly attributable to rising temperatures, changing trajectories, vectors, infectious disease vectors, and so on. Lots of premature deaths, costs in the trillions, and again, these are underestimates. Now, if you want to look more closely, this is a very busy wheel. Needless to say, I call it the wheel of misfortune. If we go clockwise, the major categories of climate change caused disease include just the categories: air pollution, vector-borne diseases, allergies, waterborne diseases, mental health, water and food supply, heat syndromes, severe weather events. And at 6 o'clock, you see environmental refugees, and I sort that out because that's of such immense importance nowadays. And on the right, you see a child sitting there on the ruins from Katrina. The mental health implications of climate change, of being refugees. People are worrying today in Kevalina. They're worrying down in New Orleans. The Ile de Jean Charles, which is in the Mississippi Delta. $50 million has been allocated by the government to move the indigenous Native Americans who've lived there their entire lives, generations, out of there because it's sinking. It's almost completely underwater. There were 22,000 acres. Initially, there's now a quarter of a mile by 2 miles, and there are about 35 families living there. And they're Choctaw Native Americans. So we have Native Americans in Alaska, Native Americans in New Orleans, who are facing this issue not at 2100, not at 2030, but now. So it's a real problem. So the question is, can we do something to speed adoption of mitigation or prevention of global warming, climate change, and adaptation? It's happening now. We've got to figure out ways to adapt. The die has been cast. By 2050, recent research just published a couple of months ago estimates that 414 American cities on the coasts will have lost 50% of their land area by 2050. Can we do something about that? Unfortunately not. The die is cast. No matter what we do today, that is going to happen. So that's a problem. And then the question is, do we know how to do this? And I show on the right the Clean Air Act, which is a remarkable piece of legislation, 1970 to 2016, has been instrumental in cleaning up the severe air pollution in the United States and the attendant deaths and damage to environment and the costs. So we do know how to do this. We definitely know how to decrease ambient air pollution. The bottom panel shows you what we did with NO2, and the red on the left panel in 2005, less red 2011, primarily due to policies designed to decrease the amount of burning of fossil fuels. And so our challenge right now is can we shift this curve from the right to the left? Can we steepen the rate at which we put in place policies that get us to where we need to be with mitigation and adaptation? Well, what's happening? I need some good news here. The good news from the grassroots is shown here. In 2007, 1,000 mayors in America signed a climate agreement. 1,000 mayors from all sectors of the country. Climate change agreement. So we have interest and action at that level. George Bush in 2002 put together the greenhouse gas targets for the United States in 2002. Barack Obama in 2013 developed the Climate Action Plan, which is just an extension of the research and implementation of science-based policies. There is opposition at all levels. Some of it's reasonable and some of it is not reasonable. It seems to me unreasonable to stand up in the center of the United States with a snowball and claim that this is proof that climate change is not happening. I'm sorry, I don't know. I don't know what they're teaching you guys now, but that would not pass muster, right? And I won't name that fellow because I'm sure he's a good person. As my wife keeps telling me, they're not bad people. Their behavior is not the best. You know. There's always hope, and I'm serious about that. We have to keep that in mind. People we think are evil and demonic today, hey, things can change, and they may be at the table with you solving problems tomorrow. So we need to keep that in mind. The opposition to clean power, why are people opposed to this? Well, there are three macro reasons. One is the creation of doubt. Very skillfully, the tobacco industry created doubt about the harms of tobacco. That started in 1954 and continues to this day. Climate change, the fossil fuel industry began that in the 1960s, and they learned much of the strategy from the tobacco industry. So the tobacco industry and our challenge with the fossil fuel industry today are quite remarkably similar. And they know how to push back and use the power of lobbyists and so on to stifle evidence-based policy. The Iron Triangle is just another way. This is basically when you have lobbyists get together with congressional committees and agencies of Congress, and they kind of work deals that are beneficial to themselves and beneficial to the bottom lines of companies. That's the so-called Iron Triangle. And of course that operates not only at a national but at a state level. And then the extreme concentration of wealth, which is unprecedented in history, where we have massive wealth. 65 people now in the world have the equivalent wealth of the bottom 3.5 billion people on planet Earth. So we have people who could easily fit in this room that own the equivalent wealth of 3.5 billion people. Now, what's wrong with that? I mean, I'm all for making money, but it's when you concentrate wealth to that degree that you begin to manifest some antisocial behaviors, and which is the problem. Science definitely threatens corporate polluters. This is a quote. It's a classic in the tobacco area, but it applies to us as well. This is from an unnamed tobacco executive. This is buried in the archives, the Tobacco Legacy Archives at the University of California. This is from the documents discovered through litigation of the tobacco industry. And this is a tobacco executive who just reflects that doubt is our product, the best means of competing with a body of fact that exists in the mind of the public. Create doubt. It's a very effective strategy. Now, what do Americans believe? Americans, according to the latest polls, 99.99% of climate scientists say climate change is real. There's a human link. That's the latest figure. There's 70,000 bona fide climate scientists in the world. Virtually all of them understand what's going on. Interestingly, 50% of the people at the time of this poll don't believe that. But the good news is Senate vote in January 15, 98-1, that climate change is real, not a hoax. The bad news is only 50% of the senators thought that humans had some role in creating the problem. But you have to look at the good news. And how about 6 Americas? This is a Yale poll. They do beautiful research, and they looked at attitudes of Americans. How many are alarmed, concerned, cautious, disengaged, doubtful, dismissive about climate change? They found that alarmed and concerned, more than half of Americans when this poll was taken. Cautious, about 20%. Notice only 7% were dismissive and basically were climate deniers, 7% of the American population. But take a look at this. They asked another set of questions of these 6 Americas. These questions were, would you support, from your own personal standpoint, rebates for alternative sources of power, solar, fuel-efficient cars, and so on? Would you put energy efficiency improvements in your home? Notice that anything above the line is positive, right? And even those who dismiss climate change as being a hoax would support that. So this gets into, how do we talk about this? How do we communicate these issues? What's in a word is very important. When you put slogans out, people will put up their back and they're for it or against it. But when you put out words that they understand, you get surprised like this. So most Americans are supportive. Now, what about building support across the broad sector of society for mitigation and adaptation? Interestingly, we can use tobacco control strategies which we've learned over decades. We really know how to do this. We have an evidence, a science base that knows how to move tobacco control. And we have proof of the success of this with decreasing rates. We have the per capita adult rates of tobacco use since 1964. So we have the CDC best practices, which are standards for how we implement tobacco control. Changing the culture, we learn to change how people think about tobacco, starting at a very young age. That's been extremely effective. If you increase the price of tobacco 10%, you decrease the uptake by youth by 6%. Tobacco is price elastic. So increasing the price, adding a $1 tax to, in the state of Indiana, to our already low tax of 95 cents is a smart thing to do, both for health and for wealth in the state of Indiana. Education, regulations, litigation, advocacy, and then moral, ethical issues are all important. So what's working? And let's look at a few sectors briefly and talk a little bit about policy, business, higher ed, cities, states, and so on. We'll run through these in rapid order. What about policy making? 2013 President's Climate Action Plan was put on the table. It's a cautious first step, but it's a very important step. The 2015 EPA Clean Power Plan is just part of that overall plan. Most Americans want leadership on this issue, and they reflect that in public opinion polls. So that's some good news. What about business? Business is so critical to this. We've got to get the big business on board. And what's happening? On the left, you see declarations of businesses. That curve is going like this. As businesses around the world realize that climate change is a problem for their bottom lines. Climate change threatens supply chains, right? You have massive flooding, you have droughts, you have refugees, you have all sorts of things. That impacts international corporations. They know that for sure. So there's great news. 6 big banks in September of 15 sent notes to Congress and President Obama asking for a strong climate deal, and putting a price on carbon is crucial. These are 6 banks, mega banks in the United States. So this is just some evidence that corporate America is beginning to move. The reason they're moving is threats to the supply chains, but I think more important is the fact that many corporations now internationally realize that in shifting in this revolution. We are in a revolution of shifting from fossil fuels, just like we were in a revolution moving from wood to coal to whatever. We're in the middle of this, the early part of it. And businessmen, entrepreneurs, you guys, some of you may be entrepreneurs, you should see that there are trillions of dollars to be made in shifting to new sources, cleaner sources of power. And that's a big driving factor right now. Entrepreneurs are moving in. Here's an entrepreneur, she was at NASA, and one of the problems is you have cold spots in the earth. We have monitors all over the place, but there are some places where we don't have good information about CO2 concentrations and methane. And this gal just put a suitcase thing together, and this monitors methane and CO2 from sea level 4 miles up. How neat is that? So that can be taken, she can cart that around anywhere in the world and create those measurements. So really neat stuff. Business sees its future, clean energy, and many support increasing the price of carbon, decreasing the price of renewables. Got to do those things. And many universities and others are stopping investment in fossil fuel. You probably read today that one of the largest coal companies in the world, Peabody Coal, has declared bankruptcy. And this is a global phenomenon of countries realizing that coal is a major problem that you have to move away from. My feeling about moving away from existing industries, just like tobacco farmers, is we need to figure out as a society a way to protect the honest workers that get up every day and go down in those mines and earn a living to put bread on the table for their families. Protect them from some cataclysmic getting fired from the job and having nothing to do, right? We as a society can figure out how to do that. Senator Lugar, a number of years ago, put together a plan for tobacco where he would phase it out over 15 years, but make the tobacco farmers whole, that is, make up the gap as they produce sunflowers or whatever they produce, some alternate crop. We as society would agree to pay some tax dollars to support that. That's the idea. I thought it was a neat plan. Where do you think that went in Congress? Nowhere. Higher education, we have to point fingers at ourselves. And I'm happy to be able to talk to people like Eric and President Hess and Dean Feller and others, and I engage the president of Indiana University and the chancellors and provosts. They know me. And I'm happy to say that President McRobbie is really getting involved. And here's what he said October 12, 2015 in the Bicentennial Strategic Plan. There are some challenges too big to ignore. We can't, those of us in climate change can't take full credit for this, but I think our nudging of the president and our pointing out that he had not mentioned the words climate change or global warming in the last 3 years of speeches, nor has the president of Purdue mentioned those words, that here's what he said: water, energy, and climate change. So we have to thank them and congratulate them that we're moving. So higher education is key, and we need to do a better job. Ball State, you guys familiar with what Ball State did? Now I see this beautiful campus at Wabash, and there's a huge mall out there that's just perfect for what? Yeah, geothermal. I mean, Ball State put it in, and they instantly are saving $2 million a year in energy costs. It powers up 47 buildings on the Ball State campus. Brilliant move by their president, working with Senator Lugar and others. They raised the money, and it took them about 3 years. The place was torn up, like crazy, but now it's beautiful. So they're known now around the world. It's the largest university with that kind of facility, a power generation facility, and it's right here in Indiana. So that's kind of neat. How about cities? Cities are going 100% renewable. Let's just become self-serving. Let's do it. Aspen, Burlington, Greensburg, Ithaca, Palo Alto. States, look at this. States rank in terms of energy for electricity. Here you have Idaho, 83% renewable electricity. Washington, Oregon, South Dakota, Maine. California, one of the largest countries in the world, right, California? 30% renewables. Indiana, not so much. We're 40th on the list, 3.8%. But the good news is we've got a big solar array at the Indianapolis airport. We've got, you guys have driven through Lafayette, and we've got people off the grid in various parts of Indiana, so we're beginning to move in Indiana as well. Young people are getting into this. I think it's an exciting time. Health systems, we're one of the major polluters in hospitals. We're awful, but we're changing. The new Eskenazi, the new Wishard, which is called Eskenazi, in Indianapolis is a LEED certified hospital. I think it was the 9th in the United States. And so there are major international efforts, the 2020 challenge, 10,000 hospitals globally to decrease greenhouse gas emissions by 26 million metric tons per year. One other thing about hospitals, they're science-based institutions, and just as I would hope our presidents of our universities and colleges do more to speak directly to the public about the issue, to get into dialogue with the public, I think this should be coming from our leaders in academia, our presidents, our trustees. They're, after all, governing the institutions that house the researchers that are generating the science that have brought us all this misery, right? Shouldn't they be out explaining the findings to a public that really is thirsting for good information? Use their moral, political, economic influence. Advocacy is critical. We had the largest climate march in history, 310,000 people. And the message is we can do it. We've done big things before in this country. We've tackled huge issues in this country. Women's suffrage, right? Civil rights, and on and on. People said it's impossible. You can't do those things. You can't, you know, they're not impossible. We do have some control over our destiny. So advocacy is key. I have taught a class for medical students and health professional students about advocacy, how to do it effectively. And we published a paper just a couple of years ago in Academic Medicine on how medical schools are doing in terms of teaching medical students how to be advocates in the community. You see a child at Riley Hospital with lead poisoning, you take care of that child. Isn't it reasonable that the physician would say, I wonder where that child got lead poisoning? That gets you right into public health. And that physician can use his or her experience and apply that then to try to affect changes in public policy that reduce the lead chips in paint, et cetera, et cetera. We have some great work. I just show here Earth Charter, Indiana, Sustainable Indiana. A lot of great work. Jim Poyser is just one person who's doing a marvelous job with young kids. They have camps. They're learning about global warming, climate change. We can contribute to this effort by not taking any more flying trips, by not eating lots of meat, right? By paring down the number of pets we have. There's a lady on the Monon Trail that she must be one of these trainers because she's got 8 dogs, and she occupies the whole Monon Trail. And that's a lot of dogs. I hope that there are 8 owners and not 1 owner. Yet we have to advocate. We have to ask our policymakers what their thoughts are. Introduce yourself as a student. I'm concerned. I have a question. Could you answer the question for me? You have to be polite. You have to be evidence-based. But we've got to do a better job engaging. Driving a big car by yourself. What kind of car did Dr. J drive here, Bilal?
It was a Mitsubishi Lancer.
Huh?
It's a Lancer.
Did you say Prius?
No, unfortunately not. It's a Mitsubishi Lancer.
He's asking about his own.
Oh,
My
his
car. Oh, I'm not picking on you. I'm sorry. You're driving it. It's a nice car. Yeah. And, but yeah, I get about close to 48 miles per gallon coming to Wabash. So we have 8 of those in our extended family, 8 Priuses. I would like to buy the new American, you know, what's the car out now? All electric Tesla, yeah. But they're still pricey. I mean, they're really expensive. God. Taking long showers, idling cars, air conditioners. And so there are a lot of things that we can do in our personal lives. Turn the water off when you brush your teeth, right? Building the ethical case, powerful arguments for stewardship. What is our role? Most of the world's religions, in fact, virtually all of them, and I've talked to religious scholars about this, have some form of social creed. The book that describes sort of the essence of being a part of a religion. And most religions have something in there that says we're here on earth to take care of ourselves, so that we can take care of our families, have kids, take care of the neighborhood, the community, and take care of the natural world. And virtually all world's religions agree on those points. And all major religious leaders, not just the Pope, agree with that. And you know, that's in writing from around the world. So Stephen Hawking informs us that we have a duty to at least share this kind of information. One of the reasons I'm doing this with you guys here this morning. And Pope Francis, any harm done to the environment is harm done to humanity. The ethical disparities issue, we have a cosmologist. Hawking, we have a pontiff, the Pope, and we have a rock star. Who's this guy? On the left and on top. Bono, right? Yeah, Bono. He at Davos World Economic Forum linked global poverty, and one of the students, we were talking about this earlier, and health and climate change, said that these need to be considered in the same sentences. We were asked to host Bono a few years ago, and I thought that somebody would show up in his place, but no, he came, and we had a great chat. And so we very hurriedly, my colleague and I went to our computer and knocked out a certificate, and we just happened to have a nice little thing. And so on the way out, when I was walking out with him, I asked him if he would be willing to receive this in sort of as a token of our appreciation for his work in global health. And people like that and other actors and actresses and wealthy people have done great work, and we just need to congratulate them. And I'll end here with a bathtub question. We have very serious questions before us today. And just think of this bathtub as the atmosphere. And we're dumping CO2 pollutants into this bathtub. From a justice standpoint, levels of CO2 and other greenhouse gases permitted. How much are we going to permit to be dumped into this atmosphere? Who makes the decision? How does that process work? From the equity standpoint, who fills the rest of the bathtub? So it's filled up, and who gets to fill the rest of it? Do the countries that have contributed most of the water in that bathtub, do they get to decide? Or do the countries who are suffering now the most from the public health standpoint, do they get to decide? So these are great issues that we all have to think about and try to come to grips with. So in summary, I've tried to paint a realistic picture of the challenges, but with optimism that we can rise to the occasion. We'll benefit from Einstein's belief that we can't solve the problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. We've had remarkable leaders before who rose to great challenges. They share common values and by example showed respect for life, truth-seeking, and the value of moral issues. As Albert Schweitzer said, example is not the main thing in influencing others. It is the only thing. So hopefully by our example at all levels, we'll be able to get the word out about the challenge before us and do something about it. But the time is now. So I would urge all of us here to think about what they can do tonight when you go home, or to study, or tomorrow when you get up and do what you're doing. What can we do every day to reflect about these issues, ask questions, and try to then advocate for connecting the dots between the science that we have, which is in the form of mountains of science, with prudent public policy. And let's get on that green curve. And as Eric has suggested, we probably need to be a little below that green curve. That's all I had. Thank you. Questions?
Dr. J would be entertained.
Be happy to, yeah. Questions? Here and then here.
You could mention Crawfordsville when you're talking about solar energy. We have a solar energy park, and it produces power at 7 cents per kilowatt hour compared to Indianapolis Solar Park, which is 25 cents per kilowatt hour. So we're making small strides.
That's fantastic. And these little pockets, these little niches, is where things happen. We just start here in our backyard and then work from there. That's great. I did not know that. Thanks for.
So I've already had conversations with people back in my living unit, just around campus, and the majority of them fall into that category, just uninformed about it, which I just don't understand it. Is there a website or source that I could send people to so they can just get more well-read knowledge about everything, or?
Yeah, there's great ones. Two that come to mind. One is NASA. NASA is tracking, they just released 2.9 billion images of planet Earth. And they've been up and running in climate science for years and years now. And they have a concise explanation of many of the things that I've talked about here. How do we define climate change and the changes that are occurring? What do we mean? And let's see some numbers and trends and so on, similar to this. But it's a very nice site. The other one you can go to is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Just plug that in, IPCC. And there you get some general overviews, which are very good. And then if you want to bore down deeply into the science in any of these areas, you can have at it at that site as well. National Geographic has done great work in this area, and I would mention them as well. So, common sort of issue, which is very frustrating to those of us who've been around this issue for so long. We've obviously failed in some ways to get this information out, in part because we have such huge opposition to accepting the reality that this Earth is changing rapidly, and we're causing it. But we can't blame fossil fuel industry. And by the way, the good news about the fossil fuel industry is they know the writing's on the wall, and they're moving rapidly into alternative energy. I don't know if you know that or not. They won't tell you that, they'll deny it, and they'll fight every step of the way, but they are moving. So, in fact, is it Abu Dhabi or one of the cities in the Middle East that's going completely off-grid, totally alternative energy? And that's in the middle of oil country. So you have those kinds of initiatives occurring, yeah. I'm glad you raised that, and if we can be of any help, or if I can be of any help, you know, I'd be happy to try to answer questions. But hopefully you can take some of this back. And questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, what would you consider to be some of the prominent NGOs who are doing the best work and most effective work and most cost-effective work, and helping people find green solutions to their energy issues, as well as promulgating a thoughtful, education? So what would be some of the NGOs?
Yeah, a good question, and there's some great ones out there. And part of being a good advocate from a health standpoint is knowing the websites and knowing who out there is evidence-based, they're research-based, and you know, they're connecting the dots between science and policy. Some in terms of medicine, there are physicians for concerned PSR, which started out as an anti-nuclear organization, but has morphed into, they still are concerned about proliferation of nuclear weapons for the reasons we know. But they're very evidence-based, and they have marvelous pieces at their website on climate change. Union of Concerned Scientists is another excellent one. Then you can go to Pew Charitable Trusts. Pew is doing great work on environmental issues, including climate change. Sierra Club. Sierra Club was instrumental in helping us create a coalition in Marion County to urge the city and IPL to get rid of one of the most polluting coal-fired power plants in America, which is the Harding Street coal-fired power plant. And Sierra Club really led that effort. I was charged with trying to bring the university along, which we did. We had students engaged at all levels, delivered 2,500 signed petitions to the chancellor, and so on and so on. And so as you probably know, this year, they pulled the plug on that horribly polluting coal boiler. So we really kicked them in the pants, right, for several years, and they try to reciprocate. But once they make a decision, now we've got to work with them and congratulate them and urge them on. They really made the decision for business reasons. For business reasons. They saw that the cost of continuing to invest in coal was going up like that, and if they shifted to alternative energy, it was like that. So,
example, I mean, that's a tremendously, I guess you say, celebratory example for showing businesses and other universities how they can transition effectively and with profit from polluting industries to green energy.
We have a son who's actually in the ski business. He's a patent holder and so on. But he's out in Aspen, and he started telling us about climate change about 15 years ago, 10 years ago. The ski industry is all over climate change. They've known about it because the ski resorts are going out of business. And when they have a warm winter in the Alps in Europe, Aspen knows about it because all the people come over and ski there, and vice versa. So, there's enormous monies to be made off of this shift to alternative energy. And we have entrepreneurs out there all over the United States, young people who've got ideas. And I would just urge us to think, if we just urge the fossil fuel industry to give up the subsidies that we've been giving them, this is the world's richest corporation, just give up maybe a quarter of the subsidies, maybe not all of the subsidies, and then allocate those dollars to the entrepreneurs out there to go green and develop new technologies. I mean, this country can do amazing things. We've shown that we can do it, but we just need the impetus, the excitement. We need to go for it. And I would definitely vote for that one, because it's really silly for our tax dollars to be subsidizing corporations that are really causing a problem. So, good question. Other questions? Yes, sir.
What kinds of new technology are looking promising for the future? Because I've heard rumors about this thermal energy with sand and taking that in, and I don't know if that's a real thing or not. I just saw on the internet, but just wondering what kind of new technologies out there.
Yeah, it's a very good question. There's good news and bad news about this. Good news is people are really thinking about strategies to address the problem in novel, new ways, bringing high tech. There's a potential problem, however, in a society like ours, particularly in medicine. Everybody thinks, of gadgets that we use and very technologically based, when a lot of what we do is non-technological based. In other words, it requires us to use non-gadget sorts of procedures and policies. So there are some who believe that we shouldn't even be worried about all of this because who's the Tesla guy? What's his name? Elon. Yeah. These kinds of people are going to solve it for us. And I would caution against that. However, should we be promoting and should we be urging government and private funders to support research of these individuals, I'd be the first to vote for that, absolutely. I cannot answer your specific question because I know enough about what you just said to be dangerous, so I won't talk more. Good question, though. I mean, people are, there are different ways to adjust the Earth. Some of these are just really scary. I mean, let's use lasers, and there are all sorts of things that have some merit to them. I would not dismiss wild ideas at all. But we have to balance things and get on with the real central problem, which is reducing the carbon footprint. And the way to do that is increase the price of it and decrease the price of renewable energy. And with that, businesses will just begin to shift at a more rapid rate. All the while looking for innovations such as the one you may have discussed. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
In your opinion, why was the middle 70s, late 70s, solar energy on homes seemed to be booming and it just fell off? And why haven't people kind of jumped on that bandwagon now?
Good question, and there are many reasons. When you put technology up that is going to reduce the use of traditional power sources, usually coal-based fossil fuel, you will get pushback. So the corporations will, for example, go into communities and say, do you really want solar panels on the roofs of this neighborhood? I mean, we need aesthetic buildings and all that, right? And there are communities around the country that have passed laws to prevent you from putting solar panels up. Now, I'm not suggesting that that's the only reason, but that's one of the reasons, is strong pushback on sort of shutting down the movement of these alternative energy sources out. Now, let me be more specific. In Germany now is a country that's way out in front. On an average day, on some days of the week, they're up to about 75% of the power generated in that country from alternative energy. On average, it's about 35%. That's where they are. Now, what happens when you get up to 30% of your power generated from alternative energy? What happens to the utilities, right? These utilities have been operating on business plans that go back decades. And those business plans require that you provide services to many, many people, and you charge a certain amount. And when people start moving off the grid, or they start selling power back, that is contrary to your utility business plans. And they will fight that. In Germany today, they're beginning to get into that but this is a solvable problem. But I just wanted to mention that when you get up to 35%, you are going to be interfering with the traditional corporate business plans of power companies, just the way they work. And when you do that, you begin to unsettle some significant power structures in your society, including your government and so on. So you have to deal with that in some way. And Germany is beginning to go through that process right now. Does that make sense? Iowa is about 30%. California is about 30% renewable. But anybody been to Germany recently? One of the first things you're struck with is you ride the train in any direction, and you've got windmills, you got solar, and it's just
great trains too.
Yeah. The first solar house apparently was built in about late 1960s by a German researcher, and it was all powered off of non-fossil fuel. Late 60s, and he did it with crude solar stuff, with active and passive solar strategies. And the house was built on a pole, so the entire house rotated so that he would track the sun. And this was in the late 60s. So this is just a smart German engineer that thought this up. I thought it was kind of a neat sort of thing. Every surface area, every square centimeter of that house, the railings, everything was designed to bring energy in and change it to power. Yeah, interesting. And that's happening in Indiana. We have some people in Indiana who are now off the grid. So, other questions? Okay, thank you very much. Lester Brown published The Great Transition. You ask about one book. This gives you quantitative information about, for each of the energy sectors, from coal, oil, geothermal, etc., exactly what is going on around the world, country by country by country. And you read this little book and you'll be impressed at how much is being done. We are in the middle of a really cataclysmic revolution here, which is kind of exciting. This is Lester Brown. He's a famous guy, Shifting from Fossil Fuels to Solar and Wind. And I think this was published just this year or last year. You can Google it. 2015. So that's a good one. The other one, specifically on public health, I would mention, if you're interested in the public health implications, this is called Climate Change in Public Health, edited by Dr. Levy and Potts, whom I mentioned, with an introduction by Gro Brundtland, who is a former Secretary of the World Health Organization. And this is totally devoted to the human health impacts of climate change. You probably saw yesterday on the news that Zika, which is a virus similar to dengue and yellow fever, the homing range of the Aedes aegypti mosquito, and it's the females that are the problem, right? They're the ones that bite. The homing range of that, or the range of that now, because of climate change and increase in temperatures, encompasses southern Indiana. So it's theoretically possible for somebody to get off a plane in Evansville, having been in the Amazon 2 days before, and having been bitten by an Aedes aegypti, and being at the right time after being bitten, to be bitten in Evansville by an Aedes aegypti mosquito, and you're on your way, right? So we need to think about how to protect ourselves, be smart when you're out in wild places where there are mosquitoes, and okay, I'll get out of here.